The trial of Saddam Hussein has often looked more like a theatre than a courtroom. Saddam and other defendants railing at the judge, defence lawyers tussling with guards, the first chief judge resigning after a whispering campaign that he was too soft.
December 30th, 2006. Before dawn, Saddam Hussein puts on his black pea coat and fur hat for the last time. The coldest night his guards would ever experience. Two Black Hawks wait outside, rotors spinning in the dark, about to carry Iraq's most infamous dictator to his final fate. In Baghdad, a man who once ruled with iron fists now stands on a gallows, clutching a Quran, refusing a hood, staring death in the face. His final words echo defiance, but it's too late. These are the last 48 hours of Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein's execution by hanging on December 30th, 2006, marked the end of a brutal era in Iraq, following his conviction for crimes against humanity in the 1982 Dujail massacre. The preceding 48 hours from December 28 to 30 were marked by a mix of stoic routine, reflective interactions, and mounting finality, as he transitioned from U.S. custody in a Baghdad palace-turned-prison to Iraqi control at Camp Justice. Drawing from eyewitness accounts, guard testimonies, and official records, these hours reveal a defiant yet composed dictator facing his fate.
We received the fact. It was a handwritten letter from Saddam Hussein, actually a statement to his people, saying that they should resist the occupations, they should fight the aggressors, the American and the British aggressors.
December 28, 2006, a carefully handwritten letter surfaced through the halls of Al-Quds Publishing in London. The world would soon realize this was Saddam Hussein's final message to his people, a farewell that would ignite controversy and speculation about his last days in captivity. The letter, published just 2 days before Saddam's execution, called for unity and resistance. He urged Iraqis to put aside sectarian differences, demanding they resist the occupiers and preserve Iraq's dignity. The text carefully avoided specific accusations about treason, instead focusing on a broader message of national identity and pride. Guards and intelligence officers immediately recognized the unique signature at the letter's bottom.
A handwritten letter. It was his signature. I compare this with previous signature, his previous statements and previous decrees, and it was extremely similar.
Multiple handwriting experts confirmed its authenticity by comparing it to dozens of previous decrees and documents. They noted subtle changes in the writing style, the pen strokes slightly heavier, the words more deliberate, perhaps reflecting the gravity of the situation. For Saddam's American guards, the final days were a study in controlled routine. The Super 12, as his MP detail called themselves, maintained strict professionalism. But even career soldiers couldn't ignore the human element of watching a man face his own mortality. Each morning, Saddam followed the same pattern, carefully preparing his simple breakfast, tending to his small garden, and writing in his journal. In those last days, the former dictator's routine became almost ritualistic. He continued his morning exercises on the rickety stationary bike he called his pony. Saddam meticulously groomed himself, always wearing his signature dark suit for court appearances, even when no one was watching. The guards noticed he spent more time reflecting, staring at old photographs and quietly smoking his preferred Cohiba cigars. Despite the looming execution, Saddam maintained a facade of normalcy. He still inquired about his guards' families and occasionally cracked jokes. But the tone changed, his laughter more forced, his stories tinged with a sense of finality. One guard later recalled,
"He knew the end was coming, but he refused to let it break him."
The letter's publication sent shockwaves through both Sunni and Shia communities. Some viewed it as a final call to arms, while others saw it as a desperate attempt to shape his legacy. International observers noted the carefully crafted language, avoiding direct incitement while still rallying supporters. The message's ambiguity became its strength, allowing different factions to interpret it as they wished. For the American soldiers tasked with his custody, these last days were emotionally complex. They had spent months with Saddam, developing a strange rapport that blurred the lines between enemy and human being. One guard later admitted,
It's easy to hate a dictator from a distance. It's harder when you see the man behind the headlines.
As December 29th dawned, the routine continued. Breakfast, garden, writing. But everyone knew these were the final hours. The guards carefully documented every interaction, aware that history was watching. Saddam maintained his composure, greeting each soldier by name and thanking them for their service. That afternoon, he penned his last entry in the journal, a simple note about facing death with dignity. He handed the book to his lawyer, instructing that it be delivered to his daughter. The message was clear.
Tell my people I died with a clean conscience as a soldier sacrificing for Iraq.
As the final night approached, Saddam followed his usual routine. He meticulously laid out the dark suit and carefully polished his shoes. The guards noted the extra attention to detail. Every crease perfect, every button aligned. He knew these would be the last clothes he ever wore. The farewell letter's impact would resonate far beyond those prison walls. It became a symbol of defiance for some, a reminder of tyranny for others. But for the men who witnessed those final hours, it marked the end of a chapter in history, one they would never forget.
His appeal rejected, Saddam Hussein now faces the hangman, the result of a fair trial or the decision of a kangaroo court.
December 29th, 2006. The early morning chill settles over Camp Victory as Saddam Hussein learns his final appeal has been denied.
But its decision is now final. Within weeks or even days, the former Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein will be executed by hanging.
The clock is now ticking down on Iraq's most infamous dictator, and his last 48 hours begin in earnest. What follows is a day of revealing interactions between Saddam and his American guards, captured in both official records and their personal memories. These guards, known as the Super 12, had spent months watching over Saddam. By this final morning, they'd become accustomed to his routines, his careful organization, his morning prayers, even his fondness for American pop music. But today, everything feels different. Every gesture, every word carries the weight of finality. Saddam starts his day with unusual calm. He dresses meticulously in his favorite suit, carefully grooms his beard, and sits quietly with his prayer beads. The guards notice he's more contemplative than usual, often pausing to stare into the distance during his morning routine. Around 10:00 a.m., he requests his traditional cup of sweet Iraqi tea. One guard, Rogerson, brings it to him, noting the unusual steadiness in Saddam's hands as he accepts the cup. There's a brief moment of eye contact. Rogerson later recalls it as a silent acknowledgement of the day's significance. As the morning progresses, Saddam's interactions with the guards become more personal. He asks about their families, their hometowns, even their holiday traditions. One guard, Martin, recalls Saddam's unexpected interest in Christmas, an irony not lost on anyone present. By midday, Saddam requests paper and pen. He spends the next several hours writing letters, one to his daughter, another to his wife, and one final message for the Iraqi people. The guards notice his careful, deliberate handwriting, each word weighed carefully, as if he knows these would be his last written words. Lunch is a simple affair: rice, lamb, and vegetables. Saddam eats slowly, savoring each bite. He compliments the cook, an American contractor, on the meal's quality. The guards note that he eats more than usual, perhaps knowing it might be his last proper meal. The afternoon brings a series of official visits. Iraqi officials arrive to document Saddam's final statements. The guards witness a different side of him, official, formal, measured in his responses. He speaks clearly about his legacy, his regrets, and his hopes for Iraq's future. As the sun sets, Saddam requests time alone. He spends nearly an hour in private meditation, sitting quietly in his cell. The guards maintain a respectful distance, allowing him this final moment of solitude. The day ends with a simple dinner, rice and chicken. Saddam thanks the guards for their service, expressing hope for their safe return home. One guard, Sfar, later recalls this as the moment when Saddam finally accepted his fate. As night falls, the guards prepare for the long vigil ahead. Saddam requests only his prayer beads and a small Quran. The guards take turns keeping watch, knowing this would be their final night with the man they'd come to know so intimately. December 29th. Ends not with drama, but with dignity. Saddam maintains his composure, facing his fate with remarkable calm. The guards, too, find themselves reflecting on the complexity of their relationship with this once feared dictator. But the story isn't over yet. The next 24 hours would bring the final chapter in Saddam Hussein's life, and the conclusion of one of history's most notorious regimes. As midnight approaches, the guards prepare for the final handover to Iraqi authorities. The clock is ticking down on Saddam Hussein's last day, a day that would change Iraq forever. But before the final act, there's one more night and one last dawn for the man who once ruled Iraq with an iron fist. Inside his heavily fortified cell, Saddam Hussein sat quietly, alone but not afraid. The clock ticked toward midnight on his final day in U.S. custody. He knew what was coming, but he faced it with the same defiance that had defined his rule. For nearly 3 years, Saddam had lived under constant guard by American forces. The man who once commanded fear now lived on strict routines and humble meals. On his last night, that routine broke. Instead of his usual breakfast, he received a Quran, the Muslim holy book. This would become his only companion in the final hours. Earlier that day, Saddam received 2 half-brothers, his last visitors. He handed them personal belongings and a copy of his will. Any final instructions stayed between family. The weight of 69 years of power, violence, and history hung over this quiet exchange. As darkness fell, Saddam sat alone on death row. No more American guards, no more daily routines, just the Quran and the knowledge that sunrise would bring his end. Outside, Iraqi officials prepared for the transfer. The U.S. military had been ready since early morning to hand him over. The new Iraqi government wanted the execution before the year ended, a symbolic closure to a brutal era. Inside the cell, Saddam showed little fear. Witnesses recalled his calm demeanor. He spent the evening praying and reading. No apologies, no remorse, only defiance in the face of death. As midnight approached, the atmosphere grew tense. Guards watched closely, knowing this was their last shift with the fallen dictator. Some later described him as almost peaceful, a stark contrast to the terror he once wielded. Outside, security tightened across Baghdad. The imminent execution threatened to spark violence. But for now, the city remained quiet. The world waited for confirmation that Saddam's reign had truly ended. Hours passed slowly in that cell. Saddam refused sleep, choosing instead to read and reflect. Witnesses noted his composure. No panic, no breakdown. He faced death on his terms. By dawn, his fate was sealed. American guards were ready to hand him over to Iraqi authorities. The man who once ruled Iraq with iron fists now faced justice from his own people. Saddam's last night in U.S. custody ended not with violence, but with quiet dignity. December 30th, 2006, the coldest morning of the year in Baghdad. At a secure compound near the airport, 12 American military police officers stood at attention. Their prisoner, the most notorious dictator of modern times, dressed carefully in a dark suit and coat, preparing to leave his cell for the last time. The next hours would mark one of the most historic and controversial moments of modern history. Saddam Hussein's final day began before dawn. Guards woke the former Iraqi president in his windowless cell. A simple room with a concrete sleeping platform and stainless steel sink combo. He'd spent the previous night writing poetry for his family and preparing several personal items to send to his lawyer and daughter. After a brief moment of reflection, Saddam carried out what had become his daily routine. He washed carefully in cold water, the winter air biting even inside the prison walls. He dressed meticulously in the same dark suit he'd worn to court, an intentional choice for his final appearance. His guards, who'd come to know him as Vic, short for very important criminal, watched as the 69-year-old dictator moved deliberately, almost proudly, despite the back pain that often forced him to walk hunched. The military police team split into 2 groups of 6, both fully armed and armored. As Saddam stepped out of his cell, he turned to his American captors. In a moment that would stay with them forever, he said,
"May God be with you."
Bowing slightly before climbing into an idling Humvee. The convoy moved slowly to a nearby helipad, where 2 Black Hawk helicopters waited. As the rotors spun up, Saddam boarded the first chopper with 6 guards, 2 medics, and an interpreter. The second group followed in the second helicopter. The short flight to Kadimia district, the site of the execution, was tense but uneventful, save for a moment of visible fear when the aircraft hit turbulence. Despite his bravado, Saddam had always been a nervous flyer. Upon landing at the secure compound, the group transferred to a massive armored bus known as a Rhino. The 13-ton vehicle rumbled across the base in near silence. No one spoke. The gravity of the moment was overwhelming. As the Rhino pulled up to the final security checkpoint, Saddam carefully straightened his coat and hat. One guard used a lint roller to ensure his suit was immaculate. Inside the holding area, American military police formally transferred custody of Saddam Hussein to Iraqi authorities. Legal documents were signed, and the Americans stepped back, their role complete. From that moment forward, the execution would be entirely in Iraqi hands. Witnesses described Saddam's final moments as both defiant and philosophical. He insisted on carrying a Quran and maintained his composure as Iraqi officials led him to the gallows. Despite being taunted by guards, he replied calmly,
"Is this manhood?"
and began reciting the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith.
The execution chamber. What was the atmosphere like in that execution chamber shortly before he was killed?
The execution chamber was dark, filled with masked men, stone walls, and heavy tension. Saddam Hussein, the former dictator of Iraq, walked slowly between his captors. In this moment, history turned a page that would never be unwritten. For almost 3 decades, Saddam ruled Iraq with an iron fist, his power absolute and his regime relentless. But on December 30th, 2006, the world watched as the man who once dominated the Middle East now faced his own mortality. Alongside him were Muwaffaq al-Rubai, the Iraqi National Security Advisor, and a handful of witnesses, each carrying the weight of decades of oppression, loss, and revenge. As they prepared him for the gallows, masked guards placed a noose around his neck. The air was thick, heavy with the reality that the end had finally come. Some of those present shouted political slogans, others recited Quranic verses. But amid the chaos, al-Rubai reminded Saddam of an ancient tradition, one last chance to speak his piece. Saddam responded by reciting the Shahada, the Muslim declaration of faith.
To his faith, and he has to say there is no God but Allah and Muhammad his messenger, and he said it.
It was a final act of defiance and yet a submission to the fate that awaited him. Seconds later, the trapdoor opened. Saddam Hussein, the man who had ruled through fear, violence, and war, was gone. The notorious dictator who had haunted 3 American presidents and countless Iraqi families met his end on a simple wooden platform. Al-Rubai would later describe the scene as full of death, a place where even the strongest man could not escape justice. News of the execution broke instantly, spreading across the globe. In New York City's Times Square, people watched the news ticker flash. Some felt justice had been served. Others questioned the morality of capital punishment. The reactions were mixed. Some wanted more retribution. while others believed life imprisonment would have been a greater punishment.
As news of Saddam Hussein's execution spreads across the globe, reactions within Iraq are mixed. Many Iraqis watch the execution on television. Afterwards, some celebrated in the streets. In the Baghdad slum of Sadr City, some paraded an effigy of Saddam hanging from the front of a truck. But much of how Iraqis feel about the execution depends on their tribal loyalties.
But in Iraq, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds poured into the streets, honking horns, waving hands, and flashing peace signs. The sense of relief was palpable. After decades of oppression and violence, the nightmare was finally over. Men chanted and danced, while women cried and sang. It was a celebration, but also a catharsis, a communal release of decades of pain and fear. Yet not everyone celebrated. In Saddam's hometown of Tikrit, his supporters called him a martyr. Gunmen fired into the air, mourning the loss of their leader. The nation was divided. Some saw justice, others saw revenge. Within hours, violence erupted. Bombs exploded in Baghdad and Kufa, killing dozens. The execution had not ended the violence. It had merely marked a new chapter in Iraq's long struggle for peace. In those hours, the world watched as a dictator fell, but the price of justice continued to rise. Families mourned lost loved ones, while others celebrated the end of an era. The execution of Saddam Hussein was more than just the end of a man. It was the beginning of a new and uncertain future for Iraq.